Today our topic is fatigue. Myself, Dr. B. Suresh Kumar, Department of Mechanical Engineering. Here, what is fatigue? Fatigue is one of the properties, the tendency of a material to break under conditions of repeated cyclic stresses is called fatigue. Okay. Here, here see in picture there is cyclic load is applied on the clamped workpiece so that the material gets deformation. Due to that deformation, the material undergoes fracture also, so that the fatigue fracture is caused by the propagation of cracks that initiate at a single point or at a few points in the material, so that the material gets damaged or fractured. So the fatigue study is also important in material science. Here you see where the fatigue stress is applied. The fatigue uh, property is important in railroads. After that, leaf spring, where we design the piston or connecting rod. When we go for design the chain links, there we should understand about what is fatigue strength. Likewise, we should aware about the properties. Here, always the fatigue fracture causes lot of deformations in material designs. Okay, so we should study about what is meant by fatigue. The fatigue causes always with respect to continuous or cyclic loading. So how the material behaves with respect to cyclic loading, which is important study. So the fatigue fracture is caused by the propagation of cracks. Here you see the propagation of crack that initiate at a single point or at a few points, which may be laterally dispersed on the material surface, so that the fatigue fracture or crack is initiated from single point or it may be from few points in the material surface. So the fatigue fracture study is important. When we apply the cyclic load on the material undergoes deformation, so which is called as fatigue. The fatigue fracture study is important. So the fatigue fracture is called as ductile fracture or brittle fracture. The ductile fracture, it may be a fatigue fracture, but the fatigue fracture is called as brittle fracture. So fatigue fracture are always brittle fractures. Here, most parts under fatigue specimen contain points of stress concentration, such as surface roughness or changes in part or specimen section at which stress is concentrated and where fatigue cracking initiates. So we should aware about what is meant by stress concentration. Here I tell about what is meant by stress concentration factor. Every engineer goes to study fatigue means he should aware about what is meant by stress concentration factor. A stress concentration factor is a dimensionless factor that is used to quantify how concentrated the stress is in a mechanical part. So it is defined as the ratio of the highest stress in the part compared to a reference stress, which is called as stress concentration factor, because most parts and fatigue specimens contain points of stress concentration, such as surface roughness or changes in part or specimen section, so that we should aware about what is stress concentration factor. And also we should aware about another factor, which is fatigue strength reduction factor. What is meant by fatigue strength reduction factor? The fatigue strength reduction factor, also called as fatigue notch factor, which can be determined by dividing the fatigue strength of smooth specimens by the fatigue strength of notched specimens, so that we can classify the material for fatigue study it into the smooth surface material and notched surface material. Here you see the smooth surface tensile specimen is available, and also we can produce the notch on that tensile specimen. How can we compare? From this comparison we can get the fatigue strength reduction factor. Here How can we define the fatigue strength reduction factor? The comparing the fatigue strength reduction factor to the theoretical stress concentration factor gives a measure of the sensitivity of the material to notches when under cyclic loading. So the fatigue strength reduction factor or fatigue notch factor can be determined by dividing the fatigue strength of a smooth specimen by the fatigue strength of a notched specimen. And then, what is notch sensitivity? Already we undergo the study of sensitivity. So, we can compare the notched specimen it into normal smooth surface specimen. Here, what is sensitivity? That sensitivity is called as notch sensitivity. Notch sensitivity is the fatigue factor. Okay, it can be divided by the fatigue factor can be divided by the stress concentration factor divided by fatigue factor divided by stress concentration factor minus 1. So the notch sensitivity can be defined by fatigue factor divided by stress concentration factor minus 1, which is also expressed in terms of percentage. And also in fatigue there is lot of stresses is acted on the spot or specimens. Here what all the stress is acted on the specimen during the fatigue loading? Yes, the stress in a fatigue test usually is a cycled between a maximum tensile strength and a minimum tensile stress, or between a maximum tensile stress and a maximum compression stress. The ratio of these extremes means maximum tensile stress and a maximum compression stress. Always compression stress is considered as a negative stress. Okay, the ratio between those things are called as the stress ratio. This ratio for fully reversed stress then becomes minus 1, because compression stress always denoted with the negative stress. Other terms used to describe a fatigue stress include mean stress, the stress range. The stress range means the stress variation between the extremes. So under the stress amplitude, so we should aware about how the stress curve represented there, what is range and then what is amplitude. Always the range means the variation between the extremes and amplitude means the stress variation between the mean stress and one of the maximums. Here you see in that plot there is hills and valleys available. So here the mean stress midway between extremes. Here if I draw the mean line means the midway is can be found from this. The stress midway between extremes is called as mean stress. And also the stress range means the variations between the extremes. And the stress amplitude, what is stress amplitude? The stress variation between the mean stress and one of the maximums. Already you know about what is mean stress. So from the difference between mean stress to maximum, which is known as stress amplitude. So these kind of stresses we should aware about the study of fatigue during the fatigue test also. So what is the result? The results of fatigue test are usually reported in the form of plots of stress versus number of cycles to fracture, which is also called as SN curves, capital S and capital N curves. In these plots, the number of cycles is usually plotted on x-axis, which can be represented with a logarithmic scale also. And most metals have SN curves that continually show longer lives at lower stress. So fatigue strength of the material must be reported for a given number of cycles as well as the stress ratio for the test and the stress concentration factor if the specimen contains a notch. Okay, for steels, if you are consider the steel means how the curve breaks off and becomes essentially horizontal at some stress level called the fatigue limit. Here you see after sometimes the curve plotted as like a horizontal line. If I consider the steel material, which means the stress is reduction within the incremental of number of cycles of applied load. After some points, it breaks, the line breaks, and it continues as horizontally. So, this horizontal level is called as fatigue limit of that specified steel. Likewise, we can study the fatigue property of the material. Thank you.